So for longtime listeners of the Scruffy Stuff, hopefully you remember what was one of my favorite interviews here on the show featuring Briston Maroney, an artist from Knoxville who later moved to Nashville and since to Los Angeles, who has blown up in recent years but made headlines here locally following a show at the Millet Mine that was cut a little bit short due to some fans who were heckling and what looks like Briston just having enough and walking off stage. And, you know, we recently talked here on the show about Big Ears, which is coming up, which we're going to talk about a little bit more today, because today's topic is all about concert etiquette. Something that, Brianna, I know you have some personal gripes with. I know I do too, as somebody who goes to a lot of shows. So I guess this is just a refresher course for anybody who has maybe not been to a concert in a while. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that maybe changed attitudes at shows. But really just want to make sure that something like this, do what we can to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, because everybody wants to enjoy the show that they paid money for. But before we get started, we should introduce ourselves. I am Ryan Wilusz, downtown reporter at KnoxNews.
And I'm Brianna Paciorka, photojournalist at KnoxNews and producer of the Scruffy Stuff.
And let me start by saying that this is by no means us trying to get on to anybody, right? We're no better than anybody else at a concert. Maybe, unless you're acting like people at this Briston show acted. And so I want this to be a positive conversation. And I guess, Brianna, could we just start out with maybe some personal experiences? I can go first just because I had one that was very shocking, I guess, at the Bijou Theater a couple years ago. And this was shortly after the COVID-19 pandemic started and right when shows were beginning to come back. The show was Citizen and Cope over at the Bijou Theater, an artist that I wasn't incredibly familiar with, but my wife was a fan of. And prior to the show, I listened to his music, and, it sounded like, something pretty mellow, something that made sense for a theater, something, a little bit more laid back. And, when I arrived at the show, it was quickly apparent that this crowd was there for what seemed like another reason. I was really trying to enjoy the show, and it was one of the most striking moments I've ever had at a concert, where it was just like, to the point where you could almost not even hear the music. Just the amount of people around us who were talking, who were shouting. Based on their shouts, it sounded like a lot of people perhaps were drinking. Even their shouts were slurred. And just for that type of music in that type of intimate setting, I think the setting is part of what made it so startling. It's just like, this is a nice theater in our downtown. This is an artist who, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, just played like solo with a guitar. So it was a quiet set by nature. And I remember, Citizen Cope stopping during the show and addressing it as well. Almost felt a little like embarrassed, I guess, like that, that there was a situation like this happening at like a show in my town. I don't know. So that was just one experience for me. And like I said, January 2022, shortly after concerts began coming back following the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to talk about that a little bit more here in a bit, just how maybe that could have shaped the way people have acted since shows have returned, the pandemic itself and being locked up and away. So, but Brianna, I know you've had some similar experiences.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about just Knoxville shows, one that I had kind of a just bizarre kind of experience was I got really cheap last minute tickets to see Wilco at the Tennessee Theater last April 2023. And we went, and the opener was The A's, which is just literally two women who sing. Like, they didn't have like a backing band or anything. So it was a pretty like quiet opener, kind of fun and quirky, but it's an opener. And there was a group of people that were kind of sitting in the next section over that just kept talking very loudly. And like, you can tell that people around them were getting really upset that they were talking to the point that they were like telling them like, shut up numerous times. And it was like noticeable, like everyone in the theater can like see them. And this is at the Tennessee Theater too. So like, this is a nicer, venue and everything. And then Wilco came on, and if you don't know anything about Wilco, it's kind of like 40-year-old dad rock kind of stuff. It's not,
Love it.
Yeah, it's not like overly loud, but it's not quiet either. And these two women sat down next to us and proceeded to have full out conversations like loudly throughout the entire set, and it had nothing to do with the music. They were literally just talking about work and about their boyfriends and friends and all this stuff. And I kept turning over to them and just like staring at them, and they just couldn't quite get the hint that like their conversations are, budging into other people's enjoyment of the concert and everything. And it was just kind of like, again, I only paid $10 for these tickets, but I'm there to listen to the band play. I don't want to hear your conversations. Like, this is not a place for you to be catching up and gossiping and talking about work and everything. You're there to listen to the band play, and so is everyone else.
Yeah, I remember you and I went to that Wilco show at the Bijou Theater. Didn't have quite that same experience, it sounds like, at the Tennessee Theater, which shows, I mean, it just depends on the night, right? But I think one of the most shocking things about what you just said is, how the heck did you get $10 tickets to a Wilco show?
I know. It was literally last minute, and I saw that, and, I texted my boyfriend. I'm like, hey, I don't care what you're doing tonight. I just bought these tickets. Let's go. And we went. And it was a great show. So.
Well, this is like purely anecdotal, but as somebody who goes to a lot of shows, talking about myself, and I know that applies to you as well, purely anecdotal, again, I feel like I have noticed that the crowds in Knoxville are just a little bit different than other places I've been, and I don't want to, talk badly about my own city, but it does kind of seem like I've noticed more talking during shows, more just talking is fine, but loudly talking during shows, more people just getting a little sloppy at shows. And again, a good portion of my time in Knoxville was in a post-pandemic world, or in a pandemic world, right? And so certainly I know that could have something to do with it. I think for me, I think, and probably everybody noticed this to an extent, and today we're just talking specifically about concerts, but there was a little bit of that, right? I mean, when you come, you've been locked up in your house for a year, and you come out, and I know that I felt a little bit awkward in terms of like how to socialize. Like it was sort of a surreal feeling. So I get, perhaps getting back to a show and just being excited. And, we've been without live music for a very long time. But now we're in 2024, and we're talking about this situation that happened at the Briston Maroney concert. Just a one-off incident, but something that got attention because of sort of a viral TikTok video that was going around. And from what I understand, this situation was over at the Mill and Mine, so standing room only venue, and that there was just a guy, or perhaps guys, that were just screaming from the moment that the concert started, even at the opener. Shouts for Free Bird, which I want to talk about song requests at concerts here in a second. Just screaming vulgarities, and TikTok was later posted by the same user that showed Briston reacting to maybe not the final Free Bird request, but either the first one, or if there were multiple, one in between, being cool about it. And so the first TikTok video that you saw was him walking off stage. This was like the culmination of things that have already been happening throughout the show. But let's talk about Free Bird for a second. First of all, ha. We get it. It's funny. It's been funny since like the late 70s. Not so funny anymore. But I wanted to talk about it just because it came up in my reporting that this song that Briston was playing, or was about to play, was called Rose. And if you ever go to the website setlist.fm, it's sort of a fan-driven website where people post the shows that are played at concerts. And so if you're going to a show, you can go back and look and see what songs artists typically play. This is not scientific, but I say 9 times out of 10, right? You look at these set lists, and on a tour, they're going to be pretty much the same. They're doing this every night. They don't have time to be switching it up every single night. Some bands do.
Wilco does.
Yeah, Wilco does. Yeah, I mean, we saw back-to-back nights of Wilco. I don't know if you went both nights at the Bijou. There was not a single song, crossover between the two sets. But, it's typically the same thing every night. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe people don't realize that, but they're taking you on a journey. They know where they're going. If they're going to play Rose, they're going to play Rose. If they're not, they're probably not. And if they are, you got to wait for them to get to it, because there is a set list. This is a real thing, and they're typically the same at every show.
And they usually set up their songs a certain way for a reason. And usually they like to put their bigger songs towards the end of the set. So you're going to have to wait to hear those more popular songs. That's just how it is. Like, I can't think of many artists who play their biggest songs in the first half.
Yeah, or maybe they start with the big song and end with the big song. Sometimes that happens. Play nice. Just be patient. Maybe you'll even get a set list if you're nice. When they throw them out after the show, you talked about them sort of taking you on a journey and playing your big songs at the end. Which, by the way, don't request songs that they're never going to play anyways. I remember I saw Cage the Elephant like just a few years ago, and somebody in the crowd was yelling, "Play James Brown," which is like a deep cut off their first album that came out in 2009. Like, dude, you think you're gonna be the one that convinces them to play this song they haven't played in forever? Yeah. But I wanted to talk about this too, because I always tell people one of my favorite classes that I took in college was art and culture of the DJ. And I cringe a little bit inside, even though a lot of people probably don't realize this when I see people going up, not at a concert necessarily, but at a club and requesting a song from a DJ for the same reason. DJs might not have a set list that's predetermined, but they have a goal with the songs that they're playing. It's not just, I remember my professor always telling me, for every person that says, play this song, I love this song, there's 10 people in the crowd that hate that song or that don't want to hear it, right? And so it's just that entitlement of thinking that you're special, and also it's sort of the arc that they're taking you on. Like DJs specifically play songs that they know people aren't going to like sometimes because it encourages people to go to the bar, and they're sort of the director of the whole room. And so the same thing could be said about a concert. Don't be yelling out song requests because they are an artist. You're paying to see their art, and part of their art is organizing their set lists and playing their songs in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, like don't shout out song requests unless the artist specifically like ask or kind of implies that they'll take it. Because like I've been to some shows where the musician's up on stage and they're just kind of strumming around and they want to see what crowd wants because they'll take like one or two requests, but that's not an every show kind of deal, so.
Which to the artist, be careful doing that too, because it was either the Citizen Cope show or maybe it was a Todd Snyder show at the Bijou Theater. I feel like I saw both of them around the same time, so they're kind of blurring together. But I remember, somebody was shouting out a song request, and the artist, whichever one of those two it was performing, was like, y'all want to give me some requests? What do y'all want to hear? And then everybody started screaming, and it was just like a one-off like joke, but opened up a can of worms, right? Where like the rest of the show people are shouting and think that they have this right to do it. So as an artist, be careful about that too for any touring artists out there listening to the scruffy stuff right now.
Also, I don't think people understand how cringy it kind of is. Like if you're not the person requesting it and you're just sitting there like listening to other people yell out stuff, it's just so cringy and awkward and a lot of secondhand embarrassment.
Right. Yeah, the opposite of FOMO. Like, I wish I was missing out on this right now.
Yeah.
But now comedy is a different situation. Now, granted, really shouldn't yell out at a comedy show either for the same reason. They have a set list, although a lot of times early on when they're working out their set list, they might be playing around a little bit more and interacting with the crowd. I wish there was a way that musicians had a tool that comedians do, that when people yell out that they can just destroy them verbally, because that's what happens at comedy shows, and it works out.
I wouldn't be surprised if it eventually gets to the point, like, I saw the TikTok with Briston Maroney, and I kind of wonder if that's going to egg on people to start doing that more just to get that reaction, because some people do this stuff just for the reaction. So I wonder if, musicians are going to start preparing for that a little bit more and to just call out these people, embarrass them and stuff too. So.
Yeah, and I don't know how prepared Briston was for the situation. Probably in a hometown show, you wouldn't think that you would deal with this sort of stuff. And what Briston said, I think was totally professional in the way that he handled it too. It was like, it sounds like this stuff was going on throughout the show, and Briston waited to the end, to the final song. Sounds like people were still shouting, and he essentially said, hey, listen, I grew up in this place. I grew up around people who try to make other people feel small, who just could come into a room and draw attention to themselves without any repercussions. And I get that you're trying to have fun, but this is not the time or the place, and I don't think it makes much sense to play another song right now. That's what you see in the video. Now, knowing with the context that this has been happening throughout the entire show, props to Briston for probably not being prepared and handling it like he was. But talking about concert etiquette, you talked about the Tennessee Theater being such, a nicer venue in the terms of like, it's just a little fancier. It's our grand entertainment palace. What has been your experience? Is there any sort of etiquette differences that you've noticed depending on the venue, or what would you say is the best venue to see a show in terms of crowds, or does it depend on the artist?
I think it kind of depends on the artist, but I do think standing room only venues tend to bring more of like a casual kind of crowd, because if you go to the Tennessee Theater, like obviously depending on where your tickets are, the price changes. So if you're sitting up towards the front, then you probably pay the highest amount of money there. If you're in the back, you probably pay the least amount of money. Standing room show, it's typically all one price, so you don't have as much of an investment in a standing room show as much, and it's more of like a club feel. Like, you have several bars in the back to get, drinks, and, maybe at like the Mill and Mine, there's like outdoor areas where you go smoke and maybe hang out in between, sets and everything. And I don't know, I think standing room only venues tend to, one, be cheaper, which broadens the type of people who will come out, but also it just kind of lends itself to being a more social atmosphere than, say, a sit-in venue.
Right. It's kind of that we're all in this together mindset too, right? It's like we've all paid the same amount of money to be here. We all paid money to be here, so we're all excited to see this artist. In a way, I agree with you, and in a way, it kind of doesn't make sense if you just think about it on the surface. Like, how is a standing room venue going to be the most welcoming venue when you think about, we're standing the whole time, we can't even get comfortable, people are right up on top of each other? I think when you go into that environment, you expect that is the difference. And so when you're in a theater and you're paid money for your seats, like you said, and you're sitting right next to somebody who's talking, somebody might talk just as much at a show at the Mill and Mine. I'm a little bit more lenient because, one, I feel like I'm like really immersed in the concert because we're all standing there together, and two, I knew what I was signing up for, and three, I can, hopefully they find some other space to watch the show, but if needed, if it gets bad enough, I can walk away too. The theater shows, they're seating, but you're right on top of each other too. It's like the weird in between being comfortable but also being uncomfortable and not having much room. I think hurts the theaters a little bit.
Well, I think that, again, going back to the point of, there's usually different prices for different sections of a theater. Your hardcore fans are more willing to pay more money to sit at the front. So you're going to get people who are there, like, really wanting to see the artist. They really care about it. They're going to be a lot more respectful than, say, maybe, like, the people, like, who bought last second tickets off of StubHub for $10. Like, they don't have the investment. They're just there because it was a cheap thing to do, So, not that you don't have, like, your hardcore fans at the front of the show at a standing room only venue, but
sometimes more so, like, you got there early to get that spot.
Yeah, and you waited for a long time. But again, you look at some of these shows at, like, the Tennessee Theater, some of those, like, front row seats are very expensive compared to stuff in the very last rows on the first floor or up in the balcony. So I think it kind of attracts different kinds of fans and everything. Yeah.
Pro tip, by the way, if you're ever buying seats, always use the map tool. This is just a piece of advice that you never asked for, because I feel so bad for people, because I purposely buy tickets the first row in the section where the price drops. And I feel so bad sometimes. I'm at a concert, like, standing behind a guy, and he's talking about, man, I paid $300 for these tickets. I'm like, to be like one seat in front of me, dude? Sorry. So just pro tip. But going back to, the more expensive seats that we were talking about, and going back to what you said about StubHub and buying tickets from resale, and to tie this all back into KnoxNews coverage, I recently had a conversation with Tom Bugg, who retired as the Tennessee Theater and the Bijou Theater manager after many years, and had a big hand in helping revitalize those theaters into the community assets that we know today. I didn't realize this, but Tom was talking about, how he actually kept an eye on people who bought tickets. If people bought large quantities of tickets from out of town, he kind of realized that maybe this is a scammer, and they would freeze those tickets and contact them and try to get the best people, people who are actually going to be at the show and are not just trying to make a quick buck. It doesn't sound like your people were trying to make a quick buck. It was just $10 tickets, probably just to pay for their inconvenience of not being able to go. But the reason I bring this up is just because Tom was talking to me about, like, these reselling of tickets has actually led to higher ticket prices from what he's experienced, in the sense of, bands are seeing that, wow, our tickets are being resold for 3 times the value. Why don't we sell them for 3 times the value? There's obviously people out there who are willing to pay for it. And so when you go into a show, and I had this happen recently, actually at a wrestling show over at the Coliseum, where people in front of me, and there's a chance I misheard them, but I paid $20 for my seats at this wrestling show. And there were 3 people who walked in front of me who said that they paid $200 for theirs.
What?
Now, maybe it was $200 for all 3. Even then,
that's still a lot more money.
Yeah, it's still like $50 more per ticket. And so, and I'll tell you what, they bought them off scalpers outside, and they came in and they were not in a good mood that they just spent $200. It's not like one person wanted to pay and the other person didn't. And so, the scalping aspect of it all kind of adds another layer of just, I don't know, takes the attention off the music and about the excitement of being on the show when there's, this whole other level of trying to secure tickets. And obviously we could have a whole podcast episode about all the things going on with Ticketmaster, but we are not going to talk about that today. One thing I do want to talk about, though, before we wrap up, and actually 2 things. One is cell phones at concerts, which I don't know. I mean, it's 2024. Are we really going to get rid of cell phones at concerts? Is it even worth it? It's never going to happen.
No. And
it doesn't matter either, is what I'm really asking.
Yeah,
there is a way to get rid of it. We're going to talk about that in a second.
I've been to some, comedy acts where they make you put your phones in a pouch, and like, honestly, like, I get it, but it's also a pain and I hate dealing with that. So I don't think I would ever go to a concert where that was a thing, because I just don't want to put my phone in some grimy little pouch and everything.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's what I was going to talk about, some of the efforts that I've seen here locally to get phones out of shows, comedy shows with the pouches. I had have an iPhone 10XR, I believe is what it's called, with an OtterBox on it. So they had to go get me the extra big pouch from the back to be able to fit my phone in it. I didn't mind it, just as something to be thinking about. And when you're buying tickets to shows, obviously concert etiquette 101 before you even get to the show. Check the policies before you get there, because nobody wants to be waiting in line while you argue with security about why you can't bring your person when there's clearly a clear bag policy. But the other part of that, the phones aspect of it, like, be prepared if it's a phone-free experience. I think we've been seeing, I feel like we saw more of it and then it kind of went away, and then maybe it's coming back. I don't know. I've seen it at a few, like you said, comedy shows more so than others. Yeah, I mean, phone etiquette, I guess it's...
hold your phone up for the entire show.
Turn your brightness down.
Yeah.
Turn your phone volume off. The other thing I was going to say, too, is nobody really cares that follows you about seeing every single song. Either they wish they were there, and you're making them upset, or they do not care.
Take a picture.
Yeah, take a picture. I actually do I usually limit myself, especially, I go to music festivals a lot. One video per set, and like a 30-second video. Capture the chorus. And then take a photo and then enjoy it, man. It's you paid money to be there. I'm gonna sound like an old guy that's just complaining, but it goes a long way in helping with the whole experience for everyone. And speaking of old guys and music, the last thing I wanted to talk about was Big Ears, which is just a joke. I mean, it does typically draw a larger crowd here. It draws an international crowd here, and it's coming up in March, which is very exciting. Kind of snuck up on me this year. We just published over at KnoxNews that Andre 3000 will be doing not an Outkast set. Hopefully you've heard the new Flute album, all flute. 5 performances over 4 days, sort of a residency with some separately ticketed shows that are only available to Big Ears pass holders. But I'll tell you, and you talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I don't remember the podcast. I think we were talking about Big Ears, actually, I guess, just specifically about Big Ears and Bonnaroo. Big Ears crowds are like what you should hold up as the standard.
Yeah.
Right?
The best. The best.
Yeah. And especially like you as someone who's, going around from show to show a lot more. I think you probably bounce around more than I do. So you've seen it all. How would you describe those Big Ears crowds?
Yeah. They're there for the music. They care about the music. They care about the artist. Even if they don't really know much about the artist, they care about it. They are very aware of how their movements kind of affect other listeners at the show, like to the point that, like, I'm a photographer. I'm not there to see the entire set. I'm there to take a few photos and get out. And it's kind of like where sometimes I even feel bad, like, moving around, because it's such a respectful audience that are so, like, into the music that you feel like any movement or any camera shutter sound that you make is, like, going to make people upset.
Also, a lot of those Big Ear shows are a little quieter too,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you have a lot of just like solo people doing weird stuff up on stage with a single instrument. No, yeah, they're always very attentive. I think I talked about on the last episode that we discussed Big Ears on, that it's so attentive to the point that somebody yelled at my mom to tell her to turn her phone off, even though it wasn't her phone. I had to stand up for my mama, which I'll always do. I just say that because I think she listens to the podcast still, so just trying to...
Hi, Ryan's mom.
Yeah. I mean, and part of it's that they travel to be there, right? And they paid a lot of money to be there.
A lot.
And so, yeah, they're going to make the most of it. A little bit different than what you see with the summer festivals, where, it's outside, it's hot, it's a little bit more of a party atmosphere.
And a younger crowd, too, typically.
And a younger crowd. Yeah, I've heard that Big Ears is kind of the Bonnaroo for NPR listeners. Gina Kelly of Kiss Caboose was the one who coined that phrase, or told me that phrase. So shout out to another podcast listener. But I did just want to say, I mean, the thing about festival crowds is, even if there is a rough crowd, you usually still see musicians power through those situations. It's kind of weird. It's like, thinking about how much power a musician really has to walk off stage and stand up for themselves. It's not that much. It takes a lot to do that, because if you think about, the situation like Briston, everybody there paid money specifically to see you. And so I imagine there's that dilemma of, do I walk away? These people are here for me. Then when you're on the festival side of things and you're playing for a show, those people aren't there for you. They paid for, the full festival experience, but you still have these people captive for the moment, and you want to make the most of your show.
You probably have more obligation to the festival as well.
Yes. So it's all complicated stuff, but the moral of the story, really, this 20, 30-minute podcast, just to sum it up in one sentence, just be better at concerts. That's our biggest advice. Just think about how you would act, how you would want people to act if you were up there on stage doing whatever it is that you do. I would love to hear some of the experiences, though, of our listeners. And if you would like to share those with me, feel free to reach out on Instagram at KnoxScruff, or send me an email to ryan.wilusz@knoxnews.com. Any final thoughts, Brianna?
Keep your conversations at concerts till afterwards, please.
Yes. And speaking of conversations, we will be back next week with another one here on the Scruffy Stuff. And to make sure you do not miss that episode, go ahead and hit that like or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on, so you get a notification every time a new episode drops. Leave us a review, 5 stars if you would. Tell us what you love about the show and what you would like to hear us talk about next. And don't forget to check that podcast description for links to some of the stories that we're talking about, as well as links to the Urban Knoxville Facebook group and the Urban Knoxville newsletter. Both are free resources that get you even more plugged in with what's going on in and around downtown Knoxville. As always, the Scruffy Stuff is brought to you by KnoxNews, so head on over to subscribe.knoxnews.com to take advantage of our latest offers and sign up to support local journalism today. A subscription gets you unlimited access to all of our downtown news and news across East Tennessee, everything from politics to entertainment to dining and nightlife to schools and politics. Maybe I said politics already, I don't know, but we're gearing up for election season here at Knox News. So anyways, this has been a pleasure as always. Thanks for listening. As I said, we'll be back again next week, and we'll see you at the show. Hopefully not hear you at the show. We will see you there.
Stay scruffy.